The first golden leaves of October drifted across the long avenue leading to Ashcombe Hall, settling like forgotten promises upon the ancient stone steps of one of England's oldest ducal estates. Behind towering oak doors and stained-glass windows, generations of portraits watched in silent judgment as another chapter prepared to unfold beneath the weight of tradition. Every polished corridor echoed with whispered expectations, for the House of Ashcombe had survived wars, plagues, and political upheaval, yet now faced a danger no battlefield had ever delivered, the slow poison of suspicion. Duke Sebastian Ashcombe carried the burdens of his title with quiet dignity. At 34, he had earned admiration throughout England for his integrity, generosity, and unwavering devotion to duty. Yet beneath the composed expression that society praised lived a man who loved only one woman. Duchess Evelyn Ashcombe had entered his life 6 years earlier with gentle laughter and fearless compassion, transforming the vast manor from a museum of noble history into a home warmed by genuine affection. Together they had dreamed of filling its silent nursery with children whose footsteps would echo through the halls for generations. Each passing year without an heir had become another invisible wound neither wished to acknowledge aloud. Evelyn never blamed fate, although society blamed her. Noble women whispered behind jeweled fans during grand dinners, suggesting that perhaps heaven had refused the Duchess its blessing. Older gentlemen quietly advised Sebastian that ancient bloodlines could not survive on love alone. Every smile offered to Evelyn concealed another cruel question about motherhood, while every elegant ballroom became another courtroom where she stood accused without evidence. Still, she answered every insult with grace, believing kindness would eventually silence malice. Instead, malice merely learned patience. Lady Augusta Blackwell possessed elegance polished by decades of aristocratic privilege and ambition sharpened by disappointment. As Sebastian's widowed aunt, she believed Ashcombe should remain under her family's influence, and she viewed Evelyn as an obstacle standing between her own bloodline and unimaginable wealth. Beside her stood Lord Edmund Blackwell, Sebastian's charming cousin, whose polished manners concealed relentless greed. Together they understood that destroying a marriage required neither swords nor scandal. It required only carefully chosen lies repeated often enough to resemble truth. The forged letters appeared gradually, each one claiming Evelyn had once exchanged secret promises with another gentleman before her marriage. Anonymous servants suddenly remembered overheard conversations that had never occurred. Paid witnesses insisted they had seen the Duchess meeting strangers beneath moonlit gardens years earlier. Every accusation arrived wrapped inside convincing detail, carefully designed not to provoke immediate outrage but slow uncertainty. Like rain wearing away stone, doubt settled into Sebastian's heart one quiet conversation after another. He resisted fiercely. Again and again he defended Evelyn before London's nobility, insisting no woman possessed greater honesty or loyalty. Yet every defense was answered by another fabricated document, another persuasive witness, another sympathetic warning urging him to protect the Ashcombe name before public humiliation became unavoidable. The pressure no longer came from enemies alone. Family friends, respected advisors, and influential members of Parliament began suggesting that an annulment might preserve both dignity and legacy. Duty slowly became indistinguishable from betrayal. While suspicion tightened around Ashcombe Hall, Evelyn traveled alone to a physician in the neighboring village, troubled by unusual exhaustion and faintness she could no longer ignore. She waited beside rain-speckled windows while autumn winds rattled bare branches against the small surgery. When the elderly doctor finally smiled through misted spectacles, the entire world seemed to pause. "My lady," he whispered gently, "you are expecting a child." For several breathless moments she could neither speak nor move. Tears gathered before joy reached her smile. She pressed trembling hands against her abdomen, scarcely believing the miracle she and Sebastian had prayed for through countless sleepless nights. Every disappointment, every whispered insult, every lonely anniversary suddenly dissolved beneath the astonishing certainty that their family was finally beginning. She left clutching the physician's sealed letter like the most precious treasure she had ever known. Before she reached home, a servant intercepted her carriage with an urgent message requesting her immediate presence in the estate library. The room felt strangely unfamiliar despite years spent within its walnut-paneled walls. Heavy curtains muted the afternoon light until only the fireplace illuminated Sebastian standing beside the long mahogany table. Lady Augusta remained seated with mournful composure, while Edmund stared solemnly toward the floor. Between them rested official papers bearing crimson seals. Sebastian's eyes were rimmed with exhaustion rather than anger. "Evelyn," he said quietly, "I prayed none of this would prove true. She looked from his face to the documents awaiting his signature and instantly understood that someone else's voice had spoken louder than hers. No accusation escaped her lips. No desperate defense interrupted the suffocating silence. The grandfather clock measured every heartbeat while Sebastian lifted the pen with shaking fingers. Duty demanded certainty, yet love pleaded for hesitation. For one impossible moment he almost reached across the table toward her. Instead, surrounded by forged evidence and poisoned counsel, he signed away the marriage that had once defined his happiness. Evelyn lowered her gaze, hiding tears that no one deserved to witness. The physician's letter remained folded inside her cloak, its miraculous secret suddenly too fragile for a heart that had lost faith in hers. Before dawn she slipped her wedding ring beside fresh white roses in the empty nursery they had prepared together and quietly departed Ashcombe Hall forever. From an upstairs window Sebastian watched her carriage disappear into silver mist, believing he had ended one chapter of sorrow. Far away, an elderly midwife fed a second letter confirming Evelyn's pregnancy into the fire, whispering that some truths must survive only until the child was strong enough to bring them home. Winter arrived early upon the rugged shores of Whitehaven Cliffs, where the sea hurled itself against black stone with relentless determination, as though even the waves understood that survival belonged only to those who refused to surrender. Far from London's glittering salons and the suffocating expectations of noble society, a lone carriage stopped before a modest stone cottage overlooking the grey water. The woman who stepped onto the frozen earth no longer introduced herself as Duchess Evelyn Ashcombe. To the villagers, she became Mrs. Evelyn Hart, a quiet widow who asked for nothing except honest work and the chance to begin again. The cottage contained little more than a narrow bed, a weathered fireplace, and windows forever kissed by salty mist, yet Evelyn found an unfamiliar peace within its humble walls. Every possession she unpacked carried memories she could never entirely abandon, but she refused to let grief become the inheritance of the child growing beneath her heart. Each morning she greeted the sunrise with silent resolve, reminding herself that although her marriage had been taken from her, her future had not. The sea taught the same lesson daily. No matter how violently storms battered its surface, dawn always returned. The villagers watched the newcomer with cautious curiosity until fate placed her in the care of Dr. Nathaniel Graves, the town's widowed physician. Gentle by nature and respected by every family along the coast, he recognized sorrow hidden behind Evelyn's graceful composure without asking questions she was unwilling to answer. Instead of offering pity, he offered dignity. He arranged modest employment copying school records, ensured she received proper medical care throughout her pregnancy, and quietly discouraged idle gossip before it could take root. Their friendship grew from mutual respect rather than obligation, allowing Evelyn to trust another soul without reopening wounds she struggled each day to close. One violent December night, as icy rain lashed the cliffs and thunder rolled across the sea, labor began. The tiny cottage glowed with candlelight while fierce winds rattled every shutter. Dr. Graves remained beside her through endless hours, encouraging courage when exhaustion threatened hope. Just before dawn, a baby's cry rose above the storm, clear and strong enough to silence every fear that had haunted the lonely months before his arrival. Evelyn held her newborn son against her chest, tears slipping freely as she whispered the name Oliver. Looking into his brilliant blue eyes, she saw unmistakable traces of the man who would never know he had become a father. She made a solemn promise before the fire that morning. Oliver would never be raised upon bitterness. He would grow surrounded by truth, kindness, and honor rather than resentment. If one day he asked about his father, she would speak of the goodness she had once loved instead of the weakness that had broken them apart. Love, she believed, should never become another casualty of deception. Years passed with quiet determination replacing despair. Evelyn transformed the small room where she had copied records into a welcoming classroom for fishermen's children whose families could scarcely afford books. She taught reading beside open windows overlooking restless waves, filled afternoons with music and poetry, and insisted that every child deserved opportunity regardless of birth. Parents who possessed little wealth repaid her with baskets of fresh bread, knitted blankets, and unwavering gratitude. Without realizing it, the forgotten Duchess became the beating heart of Whitehaven. Oliver flourished beneath her gentle guidance. Curious about everything, fearless before hardship, and endlessly compassionate, he possessed an instinctive habit of helping others before himself. He rescued injured seabirds tangled in fishing nets, shared meals with hungry classmates, and greeted elderly neighbors with cheerful respect. Whenever villagers praised his character, Evelyn silently thanked the father whose finest qualities lived within their son despite years of separation. Watching Oliver laugh along the windswept shore became the quiet miracle that healed wounds no physician ever could. Hundreds of miles away, Ashcombe Hall slowly surrendered to a different kind of storm. Lady Augusta and Lord Edmund tightened their control over estate finances while Sebastian, hollowed by regret he could neither explain nor escape, withdrew from the society that had once admired him. Priceless paintings disappeared into private collections. Ancient silver bearing generations of Ashcombe history vanished from dining rooms. Loyal servants who questioned suspicious transactions found themselves dismissed without ceremony. The grand estate remained magnificent from a distance, yet inside its walls warmth steadily disappeared. Sebastian noticed the changes too late. Every corridor reminded him of Evelyn's absence. He found himself wandering into the abandoned nursery where sunlight still touched the empty cradle they had chosen together. Each Christmas he unlocked a small walnut box containing her old letters, reading familiar words until tears blurred the elegant handwriting. The silence that followed every holiday grew heavier than the celebrations themselves, leaving him haunted by the life that should have been. The turning point arrived beside the bedside of Mr. Wilcox, Ashcombe's oldest retired steward, whose failing strength allowed little time for hesitation. Summoning Sebastian with urgent insistence, the elderly servant struggled for breath before speaking the truth that had burdened his conscience for years. He confessed that Lady Augusta had dismissed every loyal witness who defended Evelyn, rewarded those willing to repeat lies, and carefully isolated the Duke from anyone capable of exposing the deception. His trembling voice weakened further as he whispered, "Your Grace, your greatest mistake was never loving your Duchess too deeply. It was trusting those who feared that love more than they feared God." Those final words shattered the fragile certainty Sebastian had clung to since signing the annulment. Within days he abandoned every remaining comfort of Ashcombe Hall and began searching across England for the woman he had wronged beyond forgiveness. Seasons turned. Villages blurred together. Inns, churches, schools, and harbors offered only fading rumors of a graceful lady traveling under another name. 6 long years slipped through his hands without success. Then, in a weather-beaten coastal harbor, an elderly sailor sold him a beautifully carved wooden toy boat bearing the unmistakable Ashcombe crest. Smiling thoughtfully, the old man remarked, "Bright little fellow carved it himself. Finest boy you'll ever meet." Sebastian stared at the tiny vessel, recognizing carving marks only his own father had ever taught him, and felt destiny stir once more. 6 relentless years had passed since Sebastian Ashcombe watched his wife disappear into the morning mist, yet not a single sunrise had eased the weight he carried. Every road he traveled seemed to end with another unanswered question. Every village offered only fading memories of a graceful woman who had once passed through under a different name. Hope had become quieter than despair, but he refused to surrender it completely. Somewhere beyond England's crowded cities and forgotten countryside, Evelyn still breathed beneath the same sky, and that fragile certainty kept him riding forward. Fate finally intervened beneath iron-gray clouds gathering above the Whitehaven coast. Sebastian had followed little more than instinct after purchasing the carved wooden boat bearing the unmistakable Ashcombe crest. The fisherman who sold it remembered only that an unusually gifted boy had crafted it with remarkable patience. That single clue drew Sebastian toward the sea, though reason warned him he was chasing another illusion. Before he reached the village, the weather transformed without mercy. Bitter wind screamed across the cliffs, rain slashed sideways through the air, and frightened horses reared against the crashing thunder. Within moments his carriage struck loose stones, overturned violently, and tumbled toward the rocky shoreline below. Pain blurred his vision as freezing seawater crept around the shattered carriage. One frightened horse broke free while the other remained trapped beneath twisted wood, its desperate cries swallowed by the storm. Sebastian struggled to stand, only to collapse onto soaked earth as dizziness threatened to pull him into darkness. He wondered, with unexpected calm, whether this lonely stretch of coastline would become the end of a life already hollowed by regret. Then a clear young voice pierced the roaring wind. "Sir, don't move. The rocks are slippery." A small figure appeared through sheets of rain carrying a lantern almost too large for his slender arms. Barely 8 years old, the boy crossed the dangerous ground with astonishing confidence, choosing each step as though he had learned the cliffs by heart. Without hesitation he secured a rope around a nearby boulder, climbed carefully toward Sebastian, and offered steady support far beyond his years. "We must reach higher ground before the tide comes in," the child said with quiet determination. Despite the pain shooting through his shoulder, Sebastian found himself obeying. The boy neither panicked nor boasted. Every action reflected calm judgment learned through experience rather than fearlessness. Together they climbed toward a narrow footpath overlooking the sea until both finally reached safety beneath a weathered stone shelter. Only then did the child smile. "My name is Oliver." Sebastian returned the smile almost instinctively. "Sebastian," he answered, choosing not to reveal his title. Oliver removed his own woolen scarf and wrapped it around the stranger's bleeding hand. "Mother says true gentlemen protect strangers before themselves," he explained. "Titles matter less than kindness." The words struck Sebastian with surprising force. They echoed values Evelyn herself had repeated countless times during happier years. Listening to the boy speak felt strangely familiar, as though forgotten pieces of his own heart had somehow found their voice again. Oliver insisted they continue to the village before darkness deepened. Every resident greeted the child warmly, praising his generosity and cheerful spirit. Fishermen paused to ruffle his hair. Shopkeepers smiled with genuine affection. Elderly widows blessed him as though he were their own grandson. Watching those simple exchanges, Sebastian sensed that Oliver possessed the rare gift of making every person feel valued. Dr. Nathaniel Graves examined Sebastian's injuries and declared that several days of rest were unavoidable. While the physician prepared bandages, Oliver remained nearby, asking thoughtful questions about distant cities, forests, and castles. His curiosity carried neither arrogance nor envy. Instead, he listened with sparkling attention, absorbing every answer as though the world itself were an unfinished book waiting to be explored. The following morning Oliver returned carrying several pieces of driftwood and a small carving knife. "I'll show you something," he said eagerly. Sitting beside the cottage fireplace, the boy shaped delicate curves into the wood until a tiny sailing boat slowly emerged beneath his careful hands. Sebastian watched in astonishment. Every movement mirrored lessons his own father had patiently taught decades earlier. The angle of the blade, the carved crest upon the bow, even the tiny wave patterns along the hull were unmistakably Ashcombe traditions passed from father to son. "Who taught you this?" Sebastian asked quietly. Oliver shrugged with an innocent smile. "No one. I simply imagined the boats should look this way." Sebastian could offer no explanation for the sudden ache tightening his chest. Later that afternoon he wandered toward the village school where children's laughter drifted through open windows overlooking the sea. There, standing before rows of eager pupils, was the woman he had searched for across 6 endless years. Evelyn. Time seemed to abandon its own rhythm. The timid Duchess he remembered no longer existed. Before him stood a woman strengthened by hardship rather than broken by it. Confidence softened every graceful movement. Compassion illuminated every word she spoke to her students. The quiet sadness once hidden within her smile had transformed into peaceful resilience. She noticed him only after dismissing the children, and for one suspended heartbeat neither moved. No accusations escaped her lips. No apologies crossed his. The silence between them carried too much history for ordinary conversation. "You're injured," she said gently. "A storm persuaded me to rest here." She nodded with composed dignity. Whitehaven has a way of changing travelers. Days passed with careful restraint. They spoke politely about the village, the children, and the weather, avoiding memories too painful to disturb. Yet Sebastian found himself observing countless details impossible to ignore. Oliver laughed exactly as he had laughed as a boy. He tilted his head while thinking, folded his arms when concentrating, and smiled crookedly whenever pleased with his work. Each familiar gesture awakened emotions Sebastian could neither understand nor suppress. One evening, while mother and son walked together along the shoreline collecting smooth stones for the classroom garden, Sebastian watched unnoticed from the cliffs above. Their easy laughter floated across the waves like music carried by the evening breeze. They looked complete, united by a bond untouched by wealth or titles. For the first time since the annulment, Sebastian understood the full measure of everything he had lost. Behind him, Dr. Graves approached silently before speaking with grave tenderness. "Your Grace," he said, "the truth has waited long enough." Sebastian turned slowly. The physician's eyes glistened with restrained emotion. "The remarkable boy who saved your life is the son you never knew existed." Morning broke over Whitehaven beneath a sky washed clean by the previous night's rain, yet no sunrise could soften the truth Dr. Nathaniel Graves had spoken. Sebastian Ashcombe stood motionless outside the physician's cottage, unable to reconcile the years he had mourned with the life that had quietly flourished without him. Every memory of Evelyn's silent departure returned with unbearable clarity. Her trembling composure during the annulment, the unanswered sorrow in her eyes, the abandoned nursery, all of it suddenly formed a truth too devastating to escape. He had not merely lost his wife. He had unknowingly abandoned his own son before the child had taken his first breath. Grief might once have driven Sebastian into despair, but the man standing upon those cliffs was no longer ruled by pride. Before seeking forgiveness from Evelyn, he vowed to uncover every lie that had stolen 6 years from their family. He returned to Ashcombe Hall not as a broken husband searching for comfort, but as a determined duke prepared to expose the corruption hidden beneath his own ancestral roof. The estate greeted him with uneasy silence. Servants who had once avoided his gaze now sensed something had changed within their master. His voice carried quiet authority rather than bitterness, and his first command surprised everyone. Every financial ledger, every legal document connected to the annulment, and every dismissed servant was to be located immediately. No record would remain hidden. No witness would remain unheard. Lady Augusta welcomed his return with practiced elegance, though the confidence behind her smile faltered when she saw the resolve in his eyes. "My dear Sebastian," she said smoothly, "I trust your travels have finally brought you peace." "They brought me truth," he replied. For the first time in many years, Lady Augusta struggled to disguise genuine fear. Within days, Ashcombe Hall transformed into the center of a sweeping investigation. Former servants traveled from distant counties after receiving Sebastian's personal invitations. Elderly maids, stable hands, housekeepers, and secretaries returned carrying memories they had buried long ago. One by one they described dismissals that followed any attempt to defend Evelyn's character. Each testimony strengthened the same terrible conclusion. Honest voices had been silenced while lies had been carefully rewarded. The greatest revelation arrived with the elderly midwife who had attended Evelyn during the earliest weeks of her pregnancy. Age had bent her shoulders but not her conscience. From a weathered wooden chest she produced a small velvet pouch containing fragile pieces of scorched parchment preserved for 6 long years. They were the surviving fragments of the physician's letter confirming Evelyn's pregnancy before the annulment. "I burned the rest," she confessed quietly. "Not to destroy the truth but to protect the child." Lady Augusta's servants searched everywhere for that letter. Had they found it, I feared mother and baby would never have lived in peace. Expert archivists carefully reconstructed the surviving fragments, aligning faded ink and charred edges with painstaking precision. Though incomplete, the document clearly revealed its date, mere hours before Sebastian had signed the annulment, and the unmistakable words confirming that the Duchess carried a healthy child. Sebastian could barely remain standing. The realization that Evelyn had chosen silence not from deceit but from shattered trust pierced him more deeply than any accusation ever could. She had believed the child deserved protection from a father who no longer believed in his wife. The investigation widened further. Estate accountants uncovered years of missing funds hidden beneath fraudulent investments approved by Lord Edmund. Priceless paintings had been secretly sold through foreign dealers. Tenant families had paid impossible rents while the money disappeared into private accounts controlled by the Blackwells. Even the family solicitor, a man Sebastian had trusted since childhood, finally broke beneath overwhelming evidence. With trembling hands, he admitted that Lady Augusta had blackmailed him using debts accumulated by his late son. She demanded forged legal endorsements and fabricated witness statements in exchange for protecting his ruined family. "I signed every false document," the solicitor whispered before the court. "Not because I believed them, because I was too weak to resist." News of the scandal spread across England with astonishing speed. Newspapers that had once questioned Evelyn's virtue now condemned the conspiracy that had destroyed an innocent marriage. Parliament demanded accountability. Noble families who had once shunned the Duchess publicly apologized for believing fashionable gossip over proven character. The final hearing filled the great candlelit courtroom until scarcely a seat remained empty. Judges, peers, journalists, servants, villagers from Whitehaven, and members of London's highest society gathered beneath towering oak beams as decades of Blackwell ambition unraveled before every witness. Lady Augusta entered dressed with flawless dignity, refusing to acknowledge defeat. Yet as testimony mounted against her, even her composure began to fracture. The reconstructed letter lay before the judges. Former servants repeated their sworn statements. The physician confirmed Evelyn's pregnancy timeline beyond dispute. The solicitor admitted every forged signature. Edmund's secret ledgers exposed years of calculated theft. At last the Chief Justice turned toward Lady Augusta. "Have you anything further to say in your defense?" Silence lingered. Then, with weary bitterness replacing aristocratic elegance, she rose slowly. "I did what was necessary," she declared. "Ashcombe belonged to my bloodline long before that girl arrived. Love weakens noble houses. Power preserves them. Her confession echoed through the chamber like a bell announcing the end of an era. Edmund was immediately taken into custody for fraud, conspiracy, and embezzlement. Lady Augusta surrendered her titles, estates, and influence beneath the weight of undeniable evidence. The dynasty she had sacrificed everything to secure collapsed within a single afternoon. When offered the opportunity to demand severe punishment, Sebastian surprised the entire courtroom. "I bear responsibility as well," he said, his voice steady despite visible emotion. "No forged letter could have destroyed my marriage if I had trusted my wife's heart more than the opinions of others. Justice requires truth, but redemption begins with accepting one's own failures." His words silenced every whisper. He announced that portions of the Ashcombe estate would be sold immediately to repay tenant families, dismiss servants, and laborers whose lives had been devastated by Blackwell corruption. Wealth, he declared, meant nothing if purchased at the price of another family's suffering. Across the courtroom, Evelyn watched quietly beside Oliver. Pride did not brighten her face. Neither did triumph. Instead, she saw, perhaps for the first time since their wedding day, not the powerful Duke England admired, but the humble man she had once believed capable of extraordinary goodness. As proceedings ended and the crowd slowly dispersed, Sebastian crossed the great chamber until only a few quiet steps separated them. He looked first at Oliver, then at Evelyn, before lowering himself onto one knee without concern for rank or reputation. "I cannot ask you to return as my Duchess," he said softly. "Titles no longer matter. I ask only for the chance to become worthy of being your husband, and worthy of being our son's father." The courtroom fell utterly silent. Evelyn's eyes shimmered with emotion as Oliver gently reached for both of their hands, waiting to discover whether truth alone could heal a heart that betrayal had once broken. 1 week after the courtroom fell silent, Evelyn finally gave Sebastian her answer, though it was nothing he had expected. She did not ask him to reclaim her title, nor did she demand another public apology or grand declaration before England's nobility. Instead, she invited him to walk beside the cliffs overlooking Whitehaven, where the sea had carried away so much sorrow and quietly returned unexpected hope. Oliver wandered ahead collecting smooth stones while gulls circled above the restless waves. When they reached the highest point overlooking the village, Evelyn stopped beside the weathered fence and faced the man she had once believed she would never see again. "If we return to Ashcombe Hall today," she said calmly, "everyone will celebrate a reconciliation. They will applaud forgiveness because it makes a beautiful story. But they will never know whether we truly healed." Sebastian listened without interruption. "I do not want another performance for society," she continued. "I want truth." "What truth?" "That a husband cannot rebuild a family with promises alone. Love returned too quickly is often love never truly repaired." Her words carried no anger. They carried wisdom earned through years of loneliness. She looked toward Oliver, who was laughing as he chased the wind across the cliffs. "If you truly wish to become his father again, and my husband again, then spend 1 year here. No servants. No titles. No special treatment. Live as the villagers live. Earn their respect as you must earn ours." Sebastian smiled before she had even finished speaking. "I accept." Without hesitation, the Duke of Ashcombe rented a modest cottage only a short walk from Evelyn's school. The villagers expected the nobleman to abandon the experiment within weeks. Many quietly predicted that soft hands accustomed to velvet gloves would never survive fishing nets, muddy roads, frozen mornings, and endless labor. Sebastian heard every whispered doubt and answered none of them. Instead, he simply began working. Before sunrise, he joined fishermen pulling heavy boats across wet sand. His palms blistered beneath coarse ropes until the skin hardened with honest labor. He repaired leaking roofs after violent storms, carried sacks of grain for elderly widows, and learned to mend broken fishing nets beside men who had once feared speaking to a duke. Every evening he returned home exhausted yet strangely content, discovering a peace that centuries of inherited privilege had never given him. Oliver watched everything. At first the boy remained politely distant, uncertain whether this remarkable stranger would disappear as suddenly as he had arrived. Sebastian never forced affection. He simply remained present. They repaired tiny wooden boats together beside the fireplace, planted vegetables in the cottage garden, and spent long afternoons walking the cliffs discussing birds, history, stars, and the changing tides. Every shared day quietly replaced years of absence that neither father nor son could recover but both could honor. One rainy afternoon, Oliver accidentally shattered the carefully carved toy boat that had first brought Sebastian to Whitehaven. "I'm sorry," the boy whispered, fighting tears. Sebastian picked up the broken pieces and smiled. Wood can be carved again. Oliver lowered his eyes. But it won't be exactly the same. No, Sebastian answered gently. Sometimes what is repaired becomes stronger because we understand how easily it can be broken. Oliver studied him for several quiet moments before slipping his small hand into Sebastian's. From that day forward, he no longer called him sir. He called him father. The single word nearly brought Sebastian to tears. Evelyn witnessed the moment from the schoolhouse doorway without interrupting. She realized forgiveness had not arrived through speeches or noble gestures. It had grown slowly through countless ordinary acts of patience, humility, and unwavering consistency. The proud Duke who had once trusted appearances more than love had become a man willing to earn every smile his family offered him. As spring transformed Whitehaven into a tapestry of wildflowers and bright green hillsides, the village itself began changing. Inspired by Sebastian's willingness to work alongside them, neighbors who had rarely spoken beyond necessity united to improve their community. Fishermen rebuilt abandoned docks. Women organized literacy evenings for adults who had never learned to read. Older children helped younger ones with lessons after school. Hope proved surprisingly contagious. When the promised year finally ended, Sebastian made no mention of returning to Ashcombe Hall. Instead, Evelyn approached him one quiet evening beneath the enormous oak tree overlooking the sea. "You kept every promise," she said softly. "I only began." She smiled. "Then perhaps we should begin the rest together." There, beneath branches stirred by the summer breeze, surrounded not by aristocrats but by villagers who had become their family, they renewed the vows that deception had once shattered. There were no jeweled crowns, no royal musicians, no endless procession of titled guests. Children scattered white wildflowers along the grass while fishermen played gentle melodies upon worn violins. Dr. Graves stood proudly beside Oliver, whose joyful smile shone brighter than any cathedral candle. The ceremony lasted only minutes. Its meaning would last generations. When the family finally returned to Ashcombe Hall, they returned with a purpose greater than restoring their titles. Sebastian announced that the great estate would no longer exist merely to preserve noble prestige. Vast wings of the manor were transformed into a free academy where children from every social class could study together. The eastern residence became a charitable hospital bearing Dr. Graves' name. The magnificent library, once reserved for privileged guests, opened its doors to the public without charge. Empty guest quarters became homes for widows of fallen soldiers. New scholarships allowed orphan children to attend universities previously beyond imagination. Some members of the aristocracy criticized the changes. Sebastian welcomed their criticism. "The measure of a noble house," he replied, "is not the wealth it guards but the lives it improves." Years passed with remarkable gentleness. Oliver grew into an honorable young man admired throughout England not because he would someday inherit Ashcombe, but because he carried both his mother's compassion and his father's hard-earned humility. Visitors traveled from distant counties to witness the remarkable transformation of the once proud estate into a place where learning, healing, and generosity flourished together. On Oliver's 21st birthday, he requested one final family gathering beneath the largest oak in the estate gardens. There, before friends, villagers, servants, and children whose futures had been changed by Ashcombe's new purpose, Sebastian carried a small wooden box. Inside rested the faded annulment document. Its ink had nearly disappeared. Its power had vanished completely. Oliver dug a narrow hole beneath the oak while Sebastian carefully placed the folded parchment into the earth. Evelyn removed the simple wedding ring she had preserved through every year of separation. She laid it gently beside the annulment papers. Not as a reminder of betrayal, as proof that forgiveness had conquered it. Together they covered both with fresh soil. Oliver then planted a young oak sapling directly above them. "No child," he said quietly, "should inherit bitterness when they can inherit hope." The years carried the family forward with blessings they had once believed impossible. The sapling grew into a magnificent oak whose wide branches sheltered generations of children playing beneath its shade. Couples facing hardship traveled simply to sit beneath what became known throughout England as the Heir's tree, believing its roots represented second chances earned rather than freely given. Many decades later, an elderly Sebastian and Evelyn walked hand in hand beneath those towering branches while their grandchildren chased one another across the sunlit gardens. The estate echoed not with whispered scandals but with laughter, music, and lessons from nearby classrooms. The hospital welcomed another family. The library remained full. The school bell rang joyfully across the valley. Sebastian paused beneath the great oak and watched Oliver, now a loving father himself, lifting his youngest daughter toward one of the sturdy branches. A peaceful smile crossed the old Duke's face. "The greatest inheritance I ever gave my son," he said quietly, "was never this title." Evelyn rested her hand gently within his. "No," she whispered. "It was the father who chose to earn his family back." As the evening sun bathed Ashcombe in golden light, the camera of memory seemed to rise above the flourishing estate, the thriving village, the school, the hospital, and the magnificent oak whose roots forever guarded the buried annulment and wedding ring. Together they remained hidden beneath the earth, while above them generations flourished, proving that trust could be broken, love could be lost, forgiveness could be earned, and the truest legacy was never a noble name, but a family courageous enough to choose one another again.